reports from the world's second largest continent. Hello, I'm Alison Lagrange. A very warm welcome from Durban, South Africa. We get you the news and the newsmakers from Africa. From elections to climate change to innovations and opportunities. As the world's attention shifts, we report from Africa, the heart of the global south. Join me every weekday live on First Post. Hello and welcome to First Post Africa, where we get you the top stories from the continent and from across the world. I'm Alison Lagrange, coming to you live from Durban, South Africa. First, let's take a look at the headlines. Syria is set to strike several security and military agreements with Israel by the end of the year, signaling progress in the talks between the two rivals. UK counter-terror police arrest 2 men and a woman in southeast England on suspicion of spying for Russia. Chadian President Mohamed Idriss Déby Itno strips 2 French-based anti-government activists of their Chadian nationality, accusing them of colluding with foreign powers. Japanese political hawk and China critic Sane Takaichi says that she will run in the ruling party's leadership election, a campaign that could make her the country's first woman prime minister. And Bolivia's parliament passes legislation to ban marriages and civil unions with minors, bringing the country closer to the 13 Latin American nations that have already outlawed the practice. Hello and welcome. Let's start with US President Donald Trump's Africa policy. Here is his latest stance on the continent. The US President sees Africa as a strategic partner and not a charity case. Now, who said this? His envoy for Africa, Massad Boulos. Now, Boulos met African Union Chief Mahmoud Ali Youssouf on Wednesday. The two leaders held talks in Ethiopia's capital of Addis Ababa. This was followed by a media briefing where the US envoy made remarks on Trump's Africa policy.
President Trump sees Africa not as a charity case, but as a strategic partner. Our policies are guided by respect, by realism, and by results. We are here to support leaders who pursue peace, protect their people, and promote prosperity through private enterprise and rule of law. That's why we are committed to supporting African-led efforts to resolve conflicts, combat terrorism, and strengthen regional stability.
Since returning to the White House, Trump's policies have not been very kind to Africa. He imposed high tariffs, he drastically cut US aid, and his stringent visa policies are making it more and more difficult for Africans to travel to the US. But at the same time, Trump is also eyeing access to Africa's mineral wealth and is treating the continent as a dumping ground for migrants that he wants to remove from the US. The partnership seems more or less lopsided, heavily tilted in Washington's favor. Yet the Trump administration is endorsing the US president as Africa's friend, and one of his most favorite roles have been that of peacemaker. One of the key issues discussed between the US envoy and the AU chief was the conflict in the DRC. The US envoy reiterated Trump's call for a ceasefire in the region.
President Trump believes strongly that all parties involved are ready for peace. Now, he expects them to prove that that readiness, not in words, but in action. We are working hard to make that happen, and I have urged the AU to redouble its efforts to support this process for a durable peace.
Back in June, Trump brokered a peace deal between DRC and the M23 backer Rwanda. Trump even claimed that he had stopped the decades-long conflict. But reports show that the war is actually far from over. Reportedly, the DRC army and the M23 rebels continue to clash, accusing each other of violating the ceasefire terms. Another African nation where President Trump wants to bring peace is the Sudan. A war between the Sudanese army and the paramilitary RSF has devastated the country. But there too, Trump's peacemaking efforts have hit a snag. Just last week, Sudan's army-aligned government pushed back against a new peace proposal that's backed by Washington. The Sudanese government has rejected foreign interference, plus the fresh U.S. sanctions on Sudanese finance minister and a pro-army militia make it even more unlikely for Trump to broker a truce anytime soon. But it is equally unlikely for the U.S. president to give up on his global peacemaking branding. Now, another regional issue where the Sudan is a key player is around Ethiopia's newly inaugurated dam on the Blue Nile. It is Africa's largest dam and has been at the center of conflict between Ethiopia and its downstream neighbors, Egypt and Sudan. The U.S. has backed Ethiopia's rival Egypt in the conflict. In his first term, Trump even suggested that Egypt might blow up the dam. But during the latest meeting with the Ethiopian Prime Minister, Trump's envoy hailed Ethiopia's importance in fostering regional stability. So, on one hand, Africa is paying the price for Trump's America First policy. But on the other, Washington cannot completely sever ties with the resource-rich continent, where its rivals, Moscow and Beijing, are rapidly expanding their footprint. Now, for more on this, we have with us Kani Magubane, a political analyst who is joining us live from Johannesburg, South Africa. Thank you for being with us, Kani.
A very good afternoon to you and your viewers. Thank you so much for having me.
Now, President Trump calls Africa a strategic partner, not a charity case. But then his administration seeks major aid cuts. How do you explain this contradiction? What does it suggest about Washington's long-term goals in Africa?
Well, I think that the US's long-term goals have a lot to do with cutting strategic foreign aid in order to bring many African countries to their knees. Because once many countries stop receiving that foreign aid, they become more amenable to negotiate with the US for the many mutual interest investments that they claim many American businesses want to make into the African continent. Now, just to bring clarity in terms of America saying that Africa is not a charity case, Secretary of State Marco Rubio and the White House hosted a lunch in July with African leaders from countries like Gabon, Guinea-Bissau, Mauritania, and Liberia. And, it was stated there that they are changing their approach to foreign aid, that it's not going to be a charity-based foreign aid, but that it's going to be aid that is looking at mutually beneficial relationships, business relationships between countries that can help themselves. Now, the danger with that is that it's moving away from, I would say, goodwill, to say that we are going to help you as a gesture of goodwill or because of humanitarian need in your country. But they are moving towards an approach of saying, what can the Americans get? What can the Americans get out of this deal? Like you mentioned earlier on, America is heavily invested in mineral resources of Africa. That's a bargaining chip. That's something that they want. And when they talk about peace, we must view it strategically to say peace for the Americans means an American-friendly solution. What my fear is and my concern is many of the strategic relationships they are building are not with powerhouses like South Africa or Nigeria, who are seen as very anti-US administration.
Yeah.
They're building strategic relationships with smaller economies that don't have bargaining power, that don't have the autonomy. So when we talk about solutions that are mutually beneficial, they will always be in the favor of the Americans. And so my question is, what then becomes the role of the AU? As we've seen the envoy meeting with the AU chairperson, my question is, are they trying to capture the AU? Because once the AU becomes captured by the Americans, it's going to be very difficult for them not to toe the American line.
And Kani, the US envoy says that policies toward Africa are guided by respect, realism, and results. What practical changes might African nations expect compared to past administrations? And how might this affect relationships with the AU and with individual states?
You know, the difficulty here is that the AU is supposed to be a custodian of African leadership. It's supposed to be a body that is responsible for overseeing peace processes in the country. Yet we have the Americans parading their peace processes and taking credit for victories in places like Rwanda and the Eastern DRC. And those should be AU territories. You know,
Yeah.
so weakening an AU in favor for bringing in the Americans to come and broker a peace deal, that is very concerning for me, because once again, it takes away the bargaining power. You know, African policies need to be led by African countries, and our peace and security needs to, to also show as such. But Africa is currently facing many domestic wars. You know, we have civil wars, we still have a lot of violence, and we still have a lot of political immigrants and refugees fleeing and running away from their country. And the question comes down to, who does it all benefit? Who does Africa's political instability benefit? It benefits the people who will swoop in as the heroes at the end of the day. And when they swoop in as heroes and they negotiate these plans, they want something in return. There is no such thing as a free lunch in politics. So I'm very wary to be optimistic about this new move of US saying that they are seeing Africa as a strategic partner. I'm not entirely convinced about it.
Absolutely. Connie, thank you for being with us. As always, great to have you on the show.
Thank you so much.
And let's shift our focus to the growing defense ties between the East African nation of Uganda and the East Asian nation of China. Uganda's Chief of Defense Forces, General Mahmoud Kainerugaba, is in Beijing for high-level military engagements. Uganda and China have signed a new defense cooperation agreement. Kainerugaba met with his Chinese counterpart, General Wei Zhenli, in Beijing, and the talks focused on military training and peace support for operations. Now, Uganda said that the two sides have reaffirmed commitment to strengthen defense ties. The meeting concluded with a bilateral pact focused on expanding military education, joint drills, and technology transfer. Kainerugaba is also expected to attend a military conference during his official visit to China. Now, this meeting is likely to be attended by his counterparts from various other nations. Now, before the closed-door talks, the Ugandan general was welcomed with military honors at the headquarters of China's Central Military Commission. Kainerugaba's delegation includes the Artillery Division Commander and Uganda's 4th Division Commander. And earlier, the Ugandan delegation visited the country's state-owned defense company, China National Aerotechnology Import and Export Corporation. It deals in aviation products and technology. Kainerugaba was taken on a guided tour of the facility. He viewed the cutting-edge technology in various aviation equipment. Now, the Ugandan general's visit to China is being seen as an opportunity to strengthen military ties between Kampala and Beijing. Both countries have maintained warm bilateral and military relations. Uganda-China defense cooperation dates back 2 decades. Beijing supplied trucks, artillery and patrol boats to Kampala. It also trained dozens of Ugandans at its defense university. And China also strengthened Uganda's contributions to African Union peacekeeping missions in Somalia. China and Uganda also share strong economic ties. China is Uganda's largest source of infrastructure financing. Bilateral trade between the two countries exceeded $1.2 billion last year. Meanwhile, Chinese firms are also active in Uganda's oil sector. The country aims to start crude production in 2026. Now, enhancing military cooperation has been one of the core tasks taken up by Kainerugaba since assuming the role of Chief of Defense Forces in March of last year. Now, he has actively worked on boosting military ties with Uganda's allies. He has undertaken diplomatic visits to multiple nations, and the list includes Russia, Rwanda, Algeria, Mozambique, and the Democratic Republic of Congo, among others. Kainerugaba has also hosted several high-level meetings in Kampala with foreign military representatives from the US, the UK, and France. Now, Kainerugaba's latest engagements highlight Uganda's strategic interest in maintaining strong defense partnerships with China. The visit also marks an extension to the historic ties cultivated since 1986 between the two nations. And moving on, let's turn our attention to South Africa. A big probe into alleged links between politics and crime is underway. It began on Wednesday in the country's capital of Pretoria, weeks after a delayed start. And the first person to take the stand was the top police official, whose press conference led to the launch of this probe. His name is Mkhwanazi. He is the police commissioner of KwaZulu-Natal. Now, back in July, he held a news conference where he made explosive claims. The top cop alleged that Police Minister Senzo Mchunu and Deputy National Police Commissioner Shadrack Sibiya had links to crime syndicates and drug cartels. He accused them of interfering in sensitive police investigations, and this including politically motivated murders. Mkhwanazi's allegations triggered public outcry. President Ramaphosa suspended both Mchunu and Sibiya and announced a judicial commission to investigate Mkhwanazi's claims. Now, South Africa's parliament has also been separately looking into the matter. In his opening statement before the commission, Mkhwanazi said that he would show the extent of the threat to the country's criminal justice system.
It has been my aim that I want to demonstrate that the criminal justice system has been subject to a continuous threat as well as sabotage, which has been with us over an extended period, to a point where we believe it is at real risk of a total collapse if nothing is done. Therefore, an urgent and effective interventions are required in order to avert this outcome.
While testifying before the panel, Mkhwanazi expressed hope that the commission could help in bringing a big change in the country's justice system.
I believe this commission will stand to play a very important role in order to help us to prevent this total collapse of the justice system in our country.
Mkhwanazi is hopeful that the probe will bring perpetrators to justice, but the critics of the commission are not. And why is that? Now, the findings of the commission are non-binding, and its recommendations are solely based on the president's discretion. The past record of such commissions further raises doubts on the panel's ability to deliver justice. Previous commissions appointed by President Ramaphosa have not resulted in any high-ranking officials being found guilty of wrongdoing. The panel's interim report is expected within 3 months. The suspended police minister and Deputy National Police Commissioner have denied allegations, and they too are expected to testify before the panel. South Africa has one of the highest crime rates in the world, and allegations of corruption within the police are not new. But what is actually unusual is high-ranking police officials accusing each other of involvement with criminals. The probe into Mkhwanazi's claims has stirred chaos in South Africa's political system. Now, will this probe be able to bring perpetrators to justice, or will it meet the same fate as the previous ones and be forgotten soon? Only time will tell. And for our final story today, we turn to Nigeria, where President Bola Tinubu has lifted a 6-month emergency rule in the Rivers State. The Nigerian president reinstated the state's governor, along with other officials, saying that the constitutional crisis that paralyzed governance there had been resolved. Tinubu had said that the measure was necessary to prevent anarchy. The president imposed an emergency rule in the Rivers State on the 18th of March after a standoff between the state's governor and the legislature that disrupted budget approvals and left the government in limbo. Now, Rivers is a state located in the Niger Delta, which is a major oil-producing region. It is a key hub for Nigeria's crude exports. Terrorists have previously targeted pipelines in the region, affecting output and revenue. Nigeria is Africa's largest crude oil producer, and disruption in the Rivers State and the Niger Delta region directly impacts Nigeria's oil exports, which is the backbone of the country's economy. Now, Nigeria exports around 2.3 million barrels of crude oil per day, with trade revenue of around $100 billion in 2024. And crude oil makes up 90% of Nigeria's total exports. The country's top destination for export of crude oil is China. Other top importers of Nigerian crude are India, the United States, the Netherlands, and Spain. Now, citing intelligence reports, the Nigerian president said that there was a groundswell of a new spirit of understanding among the political stakeholders, which paved the way for a return to democratic governance. The governor and his deputy and the 21-member House of Assembly of the Rivers State resumes duties today, and this emergency declaration had triggered over 40 legal challenges in multiple Nigerian courts. Tinubu defended the move as a constitutional tool to restore order, saying that dissent was a part of democratic practice. However, the Nigerian president has been criticized for a crackdown on dissent. He has also been accused by the opposition of plotting to suppress them under the guise of national security. In August of last year, protests against the Tinubu government also turned violent as thousands hit the streets across major cities, including Abuja and Lagos, and security forces attempted to quell them using force. Now, these protests were triggered by the rising cost of living. The Tinubu government currently stares at a long list of challenges, including those related to economy, security, and crime. But for now, the president seems to have averted a crisis in the oil-rich Rivers State. And that's it on the show for today. We will see you again tomorrow at the same time. Thank you for watching. Stay tuned to Firstpost.
It's over! He's done it again! straight into the roof of the net. Nice one. Straight down the middle. So a good performance from both teams here.
Hi, you're watching Firstpost. I am Gushin Garland. Let's get started.